In both the First and Second World Wars, it was imperative for the United States federal government that its men should remain unsullied and live chaste and pure lives. It was part of the mission of the American forces to take New World moral values to the defence of the old Europe, and that they should return home pure. This wasn't just for moral purposes, though. It was to ensure that they didn't contract any social diseases that would have rendered them unfit for work and to fight, and also that they shouldn't take old world disease back to the United States. In the Great War, the clean-cut and progressive intellectual social reformer Raymond Fosdick was given the aim of keeping the young soldier away from any adventures that might lead him to moral contamination. After all, as I said, it was the mission of the American Expeditionary Force to remain pure. And you could say that Fosdick was well suited for his task. A native of Buffalo, New York, he'd come under the influence of Woodrow Wilson as a student at Princeton, which helped to shape his internationalist worldview and foster an interest in social reform. He'd studied for law at New York Law School and then worked at the Henry Street settlement in the Lower East Side of New York for a short time in 1908 before investigating white slavery on behalf of the city of New York. This brought him into contact with the philanthropist John Rockefeller Jr., who in 1913 hired him to study European law enforcement for the Bureau of Social Hygiene, which had been created by Rockefeller to study and prevent prostitution, VD, and crime-related urban poverty. Later, he had investigated and revealed the extent of VD among American soldiers sent to the Mexican border following Francisco Pancho Villa's raid on New Mexico in March 1916. Then, in 1917, he was approached to head the War Department Commission on Training Camp Activities, with the express aim of stamping out certain vicious conditions traditionally associated with armies and training camps, to re-establish as far as possible the old social ties to furnish these young men a substitute for the recreational and relaxational opportunities to which they have been accustomed. These young American troops were bombarded with vivid warnings of the dangers of venereal disease from women less clean than a bullet. And they were told that a man who was thinking below the belt is not efficient. They were exhorted to be 100% efficient to win the war by avoiding the seductions of booze, a pretty face, a shapely ankle, so they could go home clean and not take the European disease to America. Morality and cleanliness were linked with modern efficiency and progressive thought. Now they were allied to wartime patriotism. It was important that the American Expeditionary Force be pure compared to the moral contagion of the old world. But warnings on their own were not enough. There was a need to eliminate the temptations which might corrupt the pure, the unsullied soldier. Though Fosdick was honest enough to admit that he did not think that we will ever absolutely eliminate the prostitute. But we do want to make it impossible for the prostitute to flaunt herself in the face of men on the streets when they are not thinking about her. Red light districts were closed in many American cities, and all houses of ill repute and saloons within 5 miles of military training camps were made illegal. This contrasted with the more pragmatic attitude adopted in continental Europe. Georges Clemenceau, the French Prime Minister, actually offered to help establish brothels for his new American allies. The Secretary of State for War, Newton D. Baker, warned Fosdick, "For God's sake, Raymond, don't show this to the President or he'll stop the war." But despite Wilson's high moral stance and, in his ignorance, American soldiers going on leave were issued with prophylactic kits. These contained calomel ointment for the treatment of syphilis, potassium permanganate solution or tablets for gonorrhea, and cotton wool for applying these chemicals to the penis as soon after intercourse as possible. French and German troops were issued with similar kits, but the British were reluctant to issue what were called dreadnought packets for fear of condoning vice. Sales of alcohol close to the training camps were also forbidden. This was largely the result of the campaigning by the temperance movement, which after the war would endorse the passage of the 18th Amendment and prohibition. But the result was minor vice was simply driven underground. Drunkenness and casual sex were seen not only as allied moral defects, which detracted from the purity of the all-American warrior, but as impediments to the winning of the war. Well, Fosdick's Baptist background and social reforming credentials were a great contrast to the more worldly, more glamorous man who was appointed to take a similar role in suppressing vice amongst the next generation in the army camps of the Second World War. The playboy, crime fighter, and vice buster, the untouchable Elliot Ness is perhaps best known as the chief investigator of the Chicago Bureau of Investigation, who with his team of untouchables had brought to justice the gangster Al Capone. Later, as Director for Public Safety for Cleveland, Ohio, between 1935 and 1942, his job was to clear up police corruption and to reform the police and fire service. However, his fondness for nightclubs, for alcohol, and for fast living made him all too familiar with the vices he was supposed to battle against. When he was appointed in 1942 by the federal government as director of the Social Protection Division, his job to fight against prostitution, venereal disease, and excessive drinking in the communities surrounding the training camps. Quickly, Ness rallied the support of police chiefs, mayors, and city managers in this new crusade against prostitution. The National Cab Association was persuaded to revoke the licenses of taxi drivers who were found to be pimping for prostitutes. However, Ness's opponents argued that a clampdown on prostitution would merely encourage men to seek other more violent outlets for their passion, such as rape, homosexuality, or the seduction of virtuous girls. Ness, however, pointed out that despite the many critics of repression, who were either honestly misinformed or whose financial interests were at stake, the more than 300 communities which clamped down on prostitution have not experienced great crime waves or increases in rape cases in the Great War. Well, there were certainly examples of attempts to provide the men in the military training camps with wholesome recreation and educational activities that would take their minds off sex, including lectures, sporting contests, and organised entertainments. Once again, young men were reminded that it was unpatriotic to contract a venereal infection and that the spread of venereal diseases was helping the enemy. Warnings were issued that even women who may look clean could be harbouring the infection. There were lectures and films educating young GIs about the dangers of infection. Although these educational programmes would have been more effective had they had adequate funding. It was also difficult to arouse enough interest from the higher officers to lead to their devoting their interest to this teaching problem, at least equal to the interest accorded such problems as teaching the use of weapons, self-protection, and hand-to-hand combat. So, in the absence of education, as in 1917 and 1918, the United States Armed Forces were driven back to providing prophylactic treatment packs and condoms. The motto was adopted: if you can't say no, take a pro. Men could buy packs of 3 condoms and a small tube of lubricating jelly in the canteens of the military bases. Well, what happened when women took up work in these canteens was that sales went down, and so it was necessary to install condom vending machines in the canteens. However, these came with the warning that if the men were foolish enough to have intercourse with commercialised or clandestine prostitutes, they will sooner or later be infected with a venereal disease. But the proper use of prophylactic agents will lessen the chance of such infections being acquired. Well, Fosdick and Ness had very different moral characters. Though both were charged with dealing with the problems of venereal diseases in the wartime training camps. Even so, Fosdick and Ness adopted very similar approaches to the problem. When educational, recreational facilities and moral exhortation failed, they resorted to the tried and trusted method of prophylaxis. What mattered in the end was not keeping the serviceman pure and not having him as a holy warrior, but keeping him healthy and fit to fight. That was what the war was about, and that was what mattered.